further ado, let me introduce our final panel, the New Imperial Scramble for Resources. To talk about how the desperate scramble for resources has shaped the UK foreign policy in the past and in the present, and what we can do about it. Our first speaker is going to be Andrew Murray, Chief of Staff for Unite the Union. I'm a member of Unite, go Unite. He was a chair of the Stop the War Coalition from 2001 to 2011, when we saw the largest demonstrations, the largest anti-war demonstrations in British history against the occupation of Iraq. And he's the author of several books on history and on politics. We are very honored to have him here with us today. And our second speaker you have heard from, but here to inspire us once more is Bernice. Bernice is a Colombian activist, also head of one of our partner organizations, Nomadesk, and she's going to be speaking about their work. This session will be a short session, but there will be plenty of time for us to chat and drink over the evening gig. If we don't have a lot of time for questions, we'll try our best to fit it all in. There will be translation for Bernice, and Patrick will be doing that on stage as well. So without any further ado, I'd like for Andrew Murray to begin the session once he's been able to have a seat.
Thanks for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. And let me start by saying that whether I've got my Unite the Union hat on or my Stop the War Coalition hat on, it's always a pleasure to be at a War on Want event. War on Want has been a very strong partner of the anti-war movement, and of course works closely with the trade union movements, including my own Unite, on a whole range of vital issues. Now, I sort of want to start off on, I suppose, a rather sobering thought. Let's say it's not March 2014, but we were meeting in Bethnal Green in March 1914. We'd have been discussing an agenda of colonialism and imperialism, but probably almost nobody would have anticipated what was heading down the track towards us. And what was heading down the track towards us then, in 1914, perhaps to dramatise it, it would have meant that of those young people you've just seen reading those wonderful poems, probably about half of them wouldn't have been alive in 4 years' time. That's what was happening then. That's what imperialism and colonialism unleashed on the world then. Now, I know there's a big argument going on about what caused the First World War. Michael Gove still thinks it was all a splendid thing, a justified cause. It was all the beastly Germans. It had nothing to do with the British Empire whatsoever. On that debate, I'm with Blackadder and Baldrick, that actually the First World War was a crime against the peoples of the world. That, of course, is history. But the same, I suppose, illusions that good people had in 1914 perhaps are still around today. The idea, you can read it, that because we have a globalized economy and trade around the world and open borders to some extent, war is unthinkable. But what happened 100 years ago is a standing rebuke to those arguments. Now, would it be possible for imperialism to mark the 100th anniversary of the First World War by starting the Third? Well, if you look around what's happening in the world today, it wouldn't be impossible. And I think that is the challenge for us. If you look at what's happening around the world today, we had last year narrowly averted a war on Syria, which would be the third major Middle Eastern war in the last 10 years. Had it happened, there is still the possibility of war around Iran. There's a huge struggle going on for control of the Arab region, with the Arab peoples playing a major part in that. Secondly, and perhaps in the long run, most dangerously, there is the pivot to Asia by Obama and the US military, the growing tensions in the Far East and the Pacific, new aggressively nationalistic government in Japan, China becoming more assertive, more unilateral declarations of these are our oceans, these are our islands, building up military power, something that resonates very much with the situation before the First World War. And thirdly, of course, the recent, continuing events in the Ukraine, with the overthrow of the government in Kiev, the coming to power of a nationalistic government, and the Russian move into taking control of the Crimea. These are all fraught with the dangers of war. In fact, the front lines of conflict, the front lines of militarization, they are everywhere we look. And all the talk that a world of undivided liberal capitalism would be a world of peace has been shown, is being shown to be an illusion. Now, I know that this conference today has been talking quite rightly about the struggle for resources as being one of the underpinnings of many of these conflicts. And there is, of course, a struggle for resources going on around the world today. But I think that is perhaps only one aspect of it. I think what really powers these conflicts is not just gaining access to resources, which is clearly an issue, particularly in the Middle East of the examples I mentioned, but it's also a question of the struggle for profit. The struggle for is capitalist firms struggling for resources and states in the control of big business to some degree or other, generally a very large degree, that are powering this struggle. And I remember it, Tony Blair saying at the time of the Iraq war, of course it's not about oil. If it was just about oil, we'd simply buy it, because in the end, Iraq produces far more oil than it could conceivably use itself, so they'd have to sell it to someone, we'd just buy it. But of course that's not the whole story, because oil, control of oil, particularly in the Middle East where it comes out of the ground fairly cheaply, is an immense source of profit for the firms that control governments like the British and the American to a very large extent. So we have to see what is going on in the world, and it is similar, in my view, not identical of course, to the situation of 100 years ago, as a struggle by great capitalist powers for control of the world in the interests of their businesses. Of course they can act together in some cases where they can, but they will also fall out and divide in others if that's what suits them best. I have just a quote I've always kept in my head from an eminent Marxist historian, Victor Kiernan, who's now dead, but he wrote that the simplest definition of imperialism is the attempt to achieve by coercion more profit than one could achieve by simple market exchange. And I think that is the underpinning principle that is dominating a lot of what is going on, this struggle for resources, yes, also struggle for markets, struggle to control the greatest possible share of world economy, all through the exploitation of millions and billions of people around the world. What we clearly are seeing today is the end of that unipolar moment that began with the end of the Cold War, when America was entirely dominant across the world, where no other power or combination of powers could begin to get a look in or begin to challenge it. That has been falling to bits. It's been falling to bits because it was based on the neoliberal economics of free market everywhere, no restraint, no role for the state, tearing down the social democratic gains, the welfare gains of people. This neoliberalism, of course, went bust in 2008 with the huge banking crash. Secondly, the disasters of the war on terror, which showed the limitations of America's military ability to impose its will on the world. I hardly think I need to expand much more on that today. And the rise of China. All of this has meant that the old days when there was one superpower, no one could challenge the Americans. Those days are passing behind us. So we're now seeing a plurality of powers, China in the Far East, Russia getting back up from its prostrate position that it was in after the end of the Soviet Union. Germany still playing a part. Britain, of course, playing a very close role alongside France in, for example, the Libyan war and in pushing for war on Syria. There is a struggle to who is going to be the hegemonic power in Eastern Europe, in the Far East, in Africa, where China and the Western powers are fighting for control of resources. The challenge is, how can we, as a movement around the world, start to find a way out of what is an immensely dangerous situation? How can we avoid sort of sleepwalking, as most of the left did in 1914, into an endless slaughter? And we don't know exactly how or in what form or what shape it will take, but I think one would have to be blind not to see that the same underlying forces are at work today in pushing us towards war. Now, I mean, we've heard a lot in the relation to the Ukrainian crisis from David Cameron and Barack Obama and others about the answer to this is respect for international law. Now, I don't think one can mount a defence of the Russian action in the Crimea on the basis of support for international law. But do we really need lectures? Well, it doesn't matter whether we need it. Will Putin or anyone take lectures on respect for international law from the people that invaded Iraq in 2003 in defiance of the United Nations, who went to war in Kosovo and Yugoslavia in 1999 in defiance of the United Nations, who went to war in Libya pretending it was about a no-fly zone and it ended up with regime change, who threatened a war on Syria, went to the brink of it without any possibility of United Nations sanction, and who every day, every week are using drones in breach of international law up and down across the world, from Pakistan to Yemen. Now, all of these are breaches of international law. All of them are supported and underpinned by the United States. And the one difference between these breaches of international law and the breach of international law in the Crimea is that these breaches of international law have killed hundreds of thousands of people around the world, where mercifully in the Crimea the death toll to date is 1. So people are not going to take lectures from David Cameron and Barack Obama that the answer to international conflict is respect for international law, because that means everyone would have to respect international law, and there is no sign whatsoever of the British or American governments submitting themselves to the arbitration of international law or the United Nations in any of these cases at all. So we cannot simply allow unchallenged the hypocrisy of the Western powers around the Ukraine when their crimes are on any scale, in the last just this century alone, of a far greater magnitude. The only thing it seems that is restraining David Cameron in all these conflicts is he doesn't want the Russian crooked money to be taken out of London. His concern is not so much the Crimea as Knightsbridge property prices, so he can keep up that briefing paper that was taken, and we don't want to disturb the city. Well, that's his problem to grapple with in this situation. Our problem is asserting the values and the interests of the common people of the world, the ordinary people of the world, in challenging the drift, maybe it's a drift or maybe it's a drive, towards militarisation and war. And I don't think we can discard the United Nations in that, or discard the possibility of respect for international law, or throw away that as a weapon in the struggle against those who are pushing to war. But we can't rely on it. We certainly can't rely on it. I think we have to rely on our own efforts and our own strength. We can draw some strength from the fact we built a very powerful anti-war movement in this country. There's similar powerful anti-war movements around the world. We need to recognise the achievements of that. I mean, I think it was in part because we marched in so many numbers in 2003 that in 2013 the government was forestalled from going to war against Syria. But of course we need to do more than that. We need to recognise that many of the issues that you'll be talking about here today have been talking about poverty, struggles in different parts of the world, are all connected. And in the end, if we want to really make poverty history, eradicate poverty, it's the same task as eradicating war and the danger of war. We have to build a movement here, perhaps in the heart of the oldest imperialist country in the world, that can actually say we need to break with imperialism. We need to plan the use of the world's resources, in the first case to eliminate poverty and hunger, and it is only through breaking with imperialism that we can break with the danger of war. Thank you.